Ladies and gentlemen, the American Jury and Bulldog Nation, I've got an interview today, and the interview is Justin Tyler White, who's wrote a book and self-published called A Replacement Son. It's my understanding that this book puts hillbilly elegy to shame. Justin, welcome to the Bulldog Show interview.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you. Now, you sent this to me out of the blue. By the way, thank you for signing it. And you wrote me a nice little letter with it. And it sounds like a hell of a story, but tell us who you are. By the way, leave out the insurance stuff for now. Tell us who you are, why you wrote this book, and what the book's about. The floor's yours.
So my name is Justin White, obviously, but I wrote this book because I couldn't not write it. That was the thing. It started as a self-therapy session. Basically, it was trying to reconcile how I remembered my past and everything that had happened, and really trying to decide what was real and what wasn't real, and trying to get an objective measure of some of those things. And very quickly, it morphed into something that was a little more abstract. It really became beyond a therapy to myself. It became something that resonated with other people. As I would share a story or a chapter with somebody, they would say, everybody has to hear
What's the book about?
So the book is about my childhood. Grew up in northern Kentucky. First scene is actually, skips forward a little bit, but when we go to the early memories, Latonia, living on, I believe it's Cambridge Square in the Section 8 housing or the assisted housing at the top of the hill. Very quickly followed by some drug production. Then we have a stabbing and a robbery. That was a nice little piece of that added in there. Then ultimately I got to be saved by my grandparents. I lived with, became essentially their child, their replacement son. And what made that even more...
Name of the book, Replacement Son.
Exactly. And what made that even more impactful was that they had lost a son a few years before. So growing up, I essentially became not just, figuratively the replacement son, but in some ways literally. I played with his toys. I slept in his room, and that couldn't... You can't ignore that impact, or that, the little nudges and the little tiny pieces of that all had an effect.
What's the theme of the book?
So the theme of the book is that you're allowed to make mistakes, because certainly there were some. Let's call the first mistake is if grandparents were any good at raising their kids, they wouldn't be raising their grandkids.
It's a good point.
That's, barring, certain
really
tragic
good
events,
point.
but there's something there. There's certainly a lot of repetition in my story in my life, and I think a lot of people would resonate with that. After I had, got a nice, safe place to live, I still kept messing up. I still kept on making mistakes. I was not a great student in school. I'd get in trouble. I was super smart, but I couldn't quite put it together behavior-wise. That kind of led to me, I actually got kicked out of school. So I didn't get kicked out of one school, not two schools, but actually three schools. So I went from Connor to Anderson High School to Cove Cath. And the final straw, my last high school experience, was releasing a raccoon on Cove Cath in the middle of the day. And the headmaster was polite enough to not invite me back. And I think there was probably a lesson there, right? So it's not we're going to kick you out. It's no amount of money will allow us to put up with you anymore.
When did you get your life on track, or are you still off track?
I tend to think I'm more on track than I was, but I started a business at 16, did pretty well with that. But you know what you do when you're 16, 17,
What kind
18?
of business did you start?
Paintball store. So American Paintball Games, had an indoor arena, had a couple stores, paintball online.
Was it drug money? How does a 16-year-old start that business?
It talks about it in the book, but he got a little bit of help from my grandparents. They co-signed a loan. It did really well. The problem was when you're 19 years old with a lot of money, what do you do with it? You spend it. And I found myself by the time I was in my early 20s broke, homeless, living on food stamps again. And that's one of the themes of the book. I was a food stamps to millionaire to food stamps. I did it in the wrong order.
Give me the funniest anecdote in the book in a brief fashion.
Oh, boy. If I had to really put it down to the funny, letting the raccoon loose, right? Like how do you get much better than that? I think the other thing that would be particularly entertaining is the description of one of my saviors, best friend to this day, but he is a walking embodiment of Ric Flair. To this day, he wears a mullet and a pair of Oakley razor blades, and will either drop a giant woo just as he walks in the room to announce, woo, woo, like that, or he'll do the come back now, like he's talking to a CB.
What's the saddest part of the story?
So there's two of them that are particularly poignant. One of them is finding out that my grandmother died, and really sad in the circumstance in which it happened. because she was supposed to be getting better, supposed to be on the way home, those types of things. So that was a really terrible point. And then what is sad for me is when my grandfather died. That was the last connection, and he was actually my step-grandfather, but he had raised me. He was essentially my father. And as he was dying, he was waiting for me at the hospital. And the second that he saw me, he said, there he is. And I'll be honest, I crawled in bed with him and spent the next 20 minutes as he died. And that was...
How old were you?
I was, at that point, 23, 24. And at that point, I was alone in the world, right? It was my wife and me, no one else. My mom was dead. My dad was dead to me. My grandfather, the only parent that I had left had been gone. And he had always protected me, always kind of spoiled me to a degree. And at that point, it's on me. And that was kind of a turning point, but it was a pretty sad point for me.
What do you do now?
So I work as a executive for an insurance servicing company. I also have a couple other businesses.
Well, you know what this sounds like? It sounds like J.D. Vance. You grew up poor, and then you went to the dark side.
I'd hardly call it the dark side. So
just teasing.
I tend to think that it's a little different than that, but...
How can people buy the book?
So they can buy it on Amazon. It's the #1 new release on Amazon this week. It's also a bestseller on their list, competing right there with J.D. Vance.
Replacementson.com.
They can go to replacementson.com, and the interesting thing about the website is there's an interactive timeline. So everything that is mentioned in the book is backed up by proof and by pieces, photos, death certificates, everything that goes into that, and you can go right across that timeline. You click on something, and it explodes it for you and shows you everything about that was part of the research process. And you can, Barnes & Noble, Walmart.com, any major bookstores, there's a few local stores that actually have it in stock. And
I like the feel of the book. I like the font. By the way, when these people publish books with crazy font, I don't get it. But it looks like a probably quick read, about 200 pages.
228 pages, something like that. Luckily for me, there's I had to cut quite a bit. I had to cut about 80 pages out of it when it came to making it a readable work. And at that point, maybe that's fodder for a second book.
As somebody who's written several books, isn't it a neat little high to get the book finished, get it
really
published,
is.
Especially the first time you see it in a bookstore? It's even if it doesn't become a bestseller, it is a hell of a thing. And what you've done here, regardless of what path your life chooses, because I just wrote a book called The Butcher of Pakistan for the same reason, is that I wanted to make sure this story is told. And it's kind of cool that you've told your story.
And it's not meant to be inspirational or, God forbid, instructional, right? Don't do what I did, but it's meant to be a demonstration that it is possible, that you're not stuck with these circumstances.
It is inspirational.
But you're not stuck with these circumstances. My story, I'm not living this life that is like, oh, I want to be like him. I hope they don't want to be like me. I want them to be better than me.
To use the common vernacular, you were, quote unquote, and I'm not saying this in a negative fashion, I'll tell you a story afterward, you basically were, quote unquote, white trash that succeeded.
That's as close as I could get. I've been called that before.
And just to let you know about that, this is a funny story. I saw in here where your grandma, by the way, I haven't read the book yet. I was teasing you before we got started how these, like Sean Hannity says, oh, I read your book over the weekend. And they didn't read the book. I want you to know, I haven't read the book yet. I hope I can. But I saw in here when I was paging through it that you had a granny. I had a granny. Her name was Granny Krippenstapel from Harlan County, Kentucky. She came to Kentucky from Arkansas, and she used to brag. She thought it was great that she was what's called a snuggins in Arkansas, which is a word for white trash.
I was going to say, my story certainly circles around the Harlan area.
So I got Harlan County blood in me. I got hillbilly blood in me too, JD.
And that's what it takes, right? Like it's
not JD, Justin. You're
right.
Not JD.
No, but that's the thing, though, right? So there is a commonality, and I think it's something that maybe is overlooked a little bit. That there is a commonality of culture, of way of life that affect. It does translate. It does come up here. Think how different it is to be here. We can drive an hour south and we can't hardly understand what they're saying. They speak differently, they eat different food and everything else. We go an hour north and we're still strangers to them.
Well, we have a lot of people in Bulldog Nation that do like to read. Sabrina Kane is not one of them. Josh Wentz is. So after we get this video up, and we'll promote it and help promote your book and get as many Bulldog Nation readers to read A Replacement Son.
Eric,
thanks for coming in, Justin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Thank you.